Hey everybody, it's Ian King, founder of King Sports International, creator of the Get Buffed educational range. Let's talk about training. Let's talk about you getting buffed. There are 7 things I want to talk about in this session, 7 things that I believe will be key in your progress towards your goals, whatever they might be. Now, the training programs and the education I place in the Get Buff range have been used by a really wide range of people. It's been used by everyday people, it's been used by elite athletes, it's been used by retired athletes, it's been used by active servicemen on duty and out of country, it's been used by women, it's used by men, it's been used by a really wide range of people. But there's one thing they all have in common, that is some of the obstacles that they need to overcome in the pursuit of their own goals of getting buffed. So let's talk about some of those now. First of all, let's talk about instant gratification. Now, instant gratification versus delayed gratification. And you might be asking what that's got to do with it. I see a lot of temptation in the Get Buff area, in bodybuilding, etc., in the general strength training area, to do things that gives you the short-term gain, and quite often at the expense of your long-term progress. Now, I've often asked myself, where does this instant gratification concept come from? Where does this drive come from? Has it always been inherent in humans? I haven't answered that fully, but one of the things I've been thinking is that perhaps it's brought on by the marketing influence, where the aim of the marketing is to make it easy for you to buy the product or whatever the case might be, and it's always presented to you as easy, and you can have it now. So I said from the outset in this program that strength training and being in the pursuit of getting buffed is not necessarily an activity of instant gratification. You can get some instant emotional rewards about training, but not necessarily achieve everything straight away. And if you're too caught up in instant gratification, you're going to make a few training errors, in my opinion. And as we go through these series of videos, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So just keep an eye and ask yourself, is this something I'm doing for instant gratification, or am I doing something to delay the gratification for my betterment? The second thing I want to talk to you about is your purpose. Because what I found is if you don't have a real strong purpose, if you don't have clarity about your purpose, then you're not going to stay in the game for the duration that I believe that you should. And I'll come back to the topic of how long should you train for. If your drive for getting buffed is, for example, on an intrinsic goal being one to impress other people only, then I don't believe that's a strong foundation for long-term training. There are a few things that I think you need to become aware of. And, for example, that the male population is often heavily focused on getting buffed, and there's a possibility that the main reason is to impress other males, etc., etc. So I do believe it's worth taking a good close look at your motives and making sure that they're rock solid. I'm going to come back to some strategies for that, but just to give you some quick insights, I believe that you can achieve a phenomenal physique as a side effect to pursuing another goal. Now, I was talking about pursuing functional strength back there in the 1990s, early 1990s. I was saying, listen, pursuing muscle for the sake of muscle is so, well, if you're a bodybuilder, fair enough. But generally speaking, I like to have a functional outcome from my strength training. I like to have a purpose for my strength training, be it to compete in a strength sport, to be involved in whatever warrior activity that you're involved in, be it for occupational purposes. But what I've found from my own professional career is that I can get phenomenal physiques with athletes, and it's not even our primary goal. It's an outcome. And in actual fact, when it becomes the primary goal for the athlete, their performance can actually suffer. And I believe it's inappropriate for them to focus on what they look like as their primary goal. And yet they can get an incredible physique as a side effect or as an outcome. And that's something I would encourage you to look at, the possibilities of latching onto something more functional in terms of the reason why you want to get bigger, stronger, and leaner. Which brings me to my third point, and that's emotion and emotional control. It's a factor that really can influence, for the better or for the worse, your training. I'll give you an example. When we're fresh, for example, when we're fully recovered, we've got a lot of energy and we're excited about training, we go in and get training, and then we're in the workout and we're getting a feeling of, wow, this feels good, I'm really fresh, I've got a phenomenal pump, and I just want to get that feeling a few more times, and we end up doing an extra set. And sometimes that is a mistake. So it's important to balance your emotional drive in training with a rational drive and make rational decisions. Instead of saying, well, this feels good, I'm going to do more of it. Ultimately, we end up killing the goose that laid the golden egg by doing too many sets. Now, continuing on with the discussion of emotion, we might get after training, or we might get a few weeks in and we're getting tired, and as a result of our fatigue and our lack of recovery, we get emotionally depressed and we drop out of training, etc., etc. So it's really important to make sure that you don't let the emotions fully control your decision, because if they do, the decisions you will make won't be for your betterment. That is, you'll ultimately drop out. And I see that pattern of excitement and depression in a lot of people, in particular those that are going through unusual periods or getting unusual support, not the typical support they'd get in training, and then coming out from the other end. So that's just something to keep in mind. Be in control of your emotions. Okay, let's go to point 4, limiting beliefs. Now, your goal is to change your body. Your goal is to change your body, and there is going to be a degree of homeostasis or a resistance to change that is inherent in your body. And if you take the psychosomatic or even the spiritualist approach to it, the body is controlled by the mind. And if we have some limiting beliefs, then it will hold back our physical adaptations, our physical changes. And some of those limiting beliefs can be that if you don't see yourself as a big, strong person or as a lean person, then for whatever reason, you create outcomes that support that belief. Now, I know I'm getting a little bit, maybe out to left field for some of you, but I think it's a real valuable journey for you to understand where your value systems lie in relation to yourself. Because if you're going to go out and change your body weight significantly, and for a male, from the age of 18 to 28, you can increase your body weight by up to 50%. And it will only occur, and lean muscle mass I'm talking about, that's only going to occur if you have a mindset that allows the possibilities to be fulfilled for the manifestation of that outcome. So we all have limiting beliefs. It's not a matter of do I have a limiting belief. We all got limiting beliefs. It's just a matter of what are they and how can we expand them? How can we make them bigger and allow bigger things to happen? Because we can put two people on the same great training program, but one person with limiting beliefs that really hold them back, and that can be the difference. So something I think is worth considering in your pursuit of getting buffed. Now let's talk about your training focus. Now this is a one that I know is rarely done, and I know that's one that would require a focus of delayed gratification and emotional control. But I'm going to tell you this. Generally speaking, I would encourage a particularly young person engaging or setting out on their getting buff journey to focus on the bigger muscle groups and on the centre of the body. Now when I say the centre of the body, I'm not talking about the core, the popular American term core. We can go there and talk about that another day. But what I'm saying is that if you focus on your peripheral muscles, your smaller muscles, you look bigger to some in a shorter period of time. You might think you're getting bigger, etc., but it's a very short-term thing for me. I believe for a long-term goal, if you have a genuine desire to make significant changes in your size and strength, that you need to focus on the muscles closer to the centre of the body. And I think it's really well illustrated by this diagram by Bill Starr in his book, The Strongest Shall Survive, where he had a body, and the body was a diagram where the body was outstretched, arms up and legs straight, and he had expanding concentric circles. I think it was a fantastic illustration to ram home this point that I would prefer you to initially focus on getting your major muscle groups bigger, your gluteals, your legs, your lower back, etc. And at the same time, your peripheral muscles. But if you go purely and initially for the peripheral approach, I believe that your long-term results can be a little bit stifled. And that requires you to have a degree of long-term planning, but also the influence. And hopefully this will be an influence for you. An influence to say, listen, get in there and pay your dues, and some of the stuff that won't necessarily make you look bigger straight away, but in the long term will actually increase your body weight and make you a larger person in total. Which links into my next point, which is what I call the depth versus the width discussion. Because in the same way that there's a temptation to build your peripheral muscles, like your arms, ahead of everything else, there's also a temptation to focus on developing width rather than depth. Now, you can generally, an experienced person with an experienced eye can look at a person and say how they've been training, how long they've been training on the basis of whether they've got width versus depth, because generally speaking it can take longer to develop your depth but also is more impacted by the type of training you're doing. So you're going to see more depth on, say, a powerlifter, as opposed to the width you might see on a person doing what I call fairly poor bodybuilding training. So as much as it gives you the warm feeling to say, hey, look how wide I'm getting, I believe you need to be conscious of how deep you're getting, because the depth, for me, is where the true size and strength comes from. And there's a lot of old adages about, this exercise will give you width and this exercise will give you depth. So I'm not going to go into that at this stage, but generally speaking, I want you to be aware of the concept of depth being more important, or as important as width in your physique. Which brings us now to the final point, which is being in it for the long haul, because I believe that your strength training and your getting buff training is and should be a lifetime pursuit. And if you're doing things that are not sustainable long term, you might not last the distance. There are some fantastic examples of high-level former competitive bodybuilders still in great shape, and I think they're great examples, but you can be your own great example where you're training for life. You need to adapt your training methods as you do get older, adapt your training methods as your circumstances in life change, but the bottom line is I encourage you to train at any point in your life at a level that's sustainable, so that you're still training for as long as you can in your life. So there's some very brief 7 points on giving you guidance in getting buff. And I'm going to finish with this point. Listen, it's really easy to give you an instant makeover. People say, well, how do I get bigger? And I somewhat flippantly I say, listen, this is what you do. Get a tan, wear your younger brother's t-shirt, and stand beside a small person. Because those 3 things are instant get buffed techniques. But are they real? Or are they long-term? Are they significant? No, they're perception. They're short-term. They're instant fixes. And that's what I've done in the last few minutes of our discussion, is it guide you towards more of a long-term approach, more towards a delayed gratification, and it will require you to take a longer picture, to set longer-term goals. But I know it's worth it, because I've been on this journey for quite a few decades, and I know a number of people who've been on the journey before me and who are on the journey at the moment and will come behind me. And I believe that if you get exposed to this sort of information, your future will be far brighter along the path for you achieving your goals and getting buffed.